I'm Amber Gladstone. I'm a leadership coach, completed an MBA technology, and I'm currently completing my master's in neuroscience and business at the University of New England. And my mission is to create and support a more positive work life. I think that for us to be able to solve the complex challenges that we're facing as humanity, you know, big, complex, big goal for me, we really actually need to be coming to work in the best possible state. So it's all about healthy high performance, because I think that work can be rewarding, fun, and invigorating, but it can also be really complex, uncertain, and stressful. So using neuroscience and psychology, I partner with other coaches and specialists to equip teams and leaders with the skills and mindsets that they need to face the challenges of modern work and life. Welcome, Bellum. Great to see you. So we've just kicked off. So very briefly, ways that you can work with me. You can work with me one-on-one as a coach. I also have a program starting in late January next year, and I work with organizations around workshops, programs, and occasionally one-on-one coaching as well, as several of you know because you've worked with me. We did cover this briefly, but any questions, drop them in the chat. You're welcome to take photos and screenshots of the slides. Please just credit me or whoever the study is. As I said, feel free to wander around, eat, whatever. Have your cameras on if you can, and we are recording the session. Is there any questions or anything about how we interact today? Nope. Okay. I'm going to move pretty quickly so we can get through the content, and also so that you can ask questions and we can have Q&A at the end. So, energy in the brain. Your brain's about 2% of your total body weight. How much energy do you think it uses? And I've realized that if you're looking ahead at the slides, you probably saw what it was, but do we want to jump in some percentages? Alana, 95%, massive. Anyone else want to jump in with a guess? If it weighs 2%, how much energy do you think it uses of your total energy in a day? 10% from Norman, 20% from Haley. Haley's pretty close. Yeah, sometimes it feels like 100%. It actually does fluctuate quite a bit. So it's 20 to 25% of your energy. And the fluctuations are going to happen if you're tired, if you're stressed, if you're learning something new, then you're going to find that actually it is going to consume more energy. And your brain will only consume glucose. That doesn't necessarily mean that you want to eat a lot of glucose, because your body is amazing at taking what you eat and actually converting it into the glucose that then supplies the brain. But because it uses so much energy, that means that the things that you do that impact your energy overall are going to massively impact your mood, your cognition, your attention, all of the things that actually come from your brain. So I'm curious, drop it in the chat or come off mute. What are some of the ways that you notice you can impact your energy and your brain? What are the things that you can do to impact that? Exercise for sure, caffeine, yep. And exercise, I'll let you know, so cardio exercise is going to improve your heart, but muscular strength is actually also going to give you this particular neurotransmitter called BDNF, and it's really, really healthy for your brain in the short and the long term. So it's very, very recommended. Just opening up the chat. So we've got yoga, caffeine, sleeping, walking. Hydration is a massive one. Sleep is also a really, really massive one. And hydration is not just water. It is actually also the electrolytes that your body needs. So you'll find sodium, and generally in a modern diet, you're getting plenty of sodium, but also magnesium and potassium are really, really important. They actually help to make sure that you're getting the connections in your brain. So your brain is chemical and electrical signals. And if you're not properly hydrated with those electrolytes, if you're exercising a massive amount, if you're living in an environment that's very humid and you're sweating a lot, you potentially actually need to consider having hydration salts. People are often really interested as well, social connection. If you're lacking social connection and you're feeling isolated, that is actually very damaging to the brain over a long period of time. Solitude is really healthy, but that loneliness over a long period of time, and a lot of us might have experienced this during COVID, that is actually a risk factor for dementia. So you really want to maintain those strong social connections. Really, really simple things that you can do very quickly. Your posture is actually going to change your brain and your mood. So making sure that when you're standing or sitting, you've got your shoulders back, you can breathe properly, is going to put your brain into a different state. And it's something that you can do in less than a second. You know, you realize that you're kind of hunched. I know when I used to do a lot of web analytics, I used to be very curled into the screen. I'd almost try and get my head in the screen as though it was going to help me to understand things better. But it was actually constricting my breathing, and it was putting me into a state that replicates almost how you are when you're scared and you make yourself small. So it's actually much better, shoulders back, nice and relaxed, breathing deeply. So one of the really amazing things that can actually change your cognition, your mood, your overall health in a really significant way is the amount of sunlight that you receive, and particularly the sunlight you get early in the morning. I'm not sure if anyone here has experience with this, where they've noticed, and maybe you can come off mute or drop it in the chat, if you don't regularly get that sunlight, the impact that it has. And I'll wait while people are potentially putting them into the chat. Some of the studies that they've seen, for example, office workers that get 15 minutes, just 15 minutes of early morning sunlight. So that's when the sun's low on the horizon. It doesn't have to be rising, but you want it to be sort of, somewhere between like 6 and 8 a.m., for example. 15 minutes, you actually get improved cognition within 5 days. So it is a massive increase from not very much time. So if you can get up early in the morning and get that sunlight, you don't look directly at the sun, you don't want to damage your retina, but you really want to be outside, because outside light, natural light, is so much more bright, even on an overcast day, than anything internally. Kathleen, you've got your hand up.
Question, how does that affect people like shift workers? Are there studies around people that do nighttime work?
Yeah, it's actually really significant, and there's not a huge amount that you can do. So people who are shift workers, at paramedics, doctors, nurses, who are doing the overnight shift, it's actually really challenging. It's not something that I've seen any long-term ways to mitigate the impact of that. So it is quite a sacrifice that people are making if they're doing that long-term.
Yeah. Does morning light need to be first thing in the morning, or can it be like before midday? Like, what does morning light mean?
Yeah, so natural light overall is going to help. So it's actually helpful as well to get natural light at night before you go to bed. And that actually helps when we get to the next slide. It helps with your circadian rhythm. The two reasons why sunlight is so powerful, and Hayley, I will come to your message in a minute, is because the first reason, your eyes are actually, this is a little bit gruesome, they're actually extruded brain cells. So when you were developing, they were brain cells, and they extruded out of your eye sockets, and parts of them, the retina, are still brain cells. So it's direct connection from the external world into your brain. So it has this really significant impact. Yeah, it's like kind of crazy. And then the second reason is because you have your circadian rhythm, you have cells, these body clock cells in every part of your body. And so when your circadian rhythm gets thrown out, then actually it throws out multiple different systems. So you can see in the diagram on the right, it's actually going to impact your immunity, impacts your heart, your digestive tract, and anything that impacts your digestive tract also has a massive impact to your mood, because most of your serotonin, 85% of your serotonin, which is like this calming neurotransmitter, is actually made in your gut. So if your digestion is out, it's highly likely that your mood is actually going to start to drop. Also impacts your muscles and your liver. And that's specifically from light then flowing through your circadian system. So jumping back, seasonal affective disorder, Hayley, I know there's specific lights you can get now, which are actually really incredibly bright lights to put inside. So when you're living in very, very far north or south environments, you can get some access to light. But these lights are, it's not just like a bright ceiling light, they're incredibly bright. Vitamin D and fish oil are both potentially very healthy for your brain. I'm just reading through some of the comments. If you are lacking in those supplements, exercise is definitely going to help in some way, because it has a lot of other neuroprotective benefits. And Jackie, the sunglasses. So you can take your sunglasses, It's sort of like sunscreen. The sunlight in the morning means that you don't necessarily need to protect yourself as much. You definitely don't ever want to look directly at the sun. It's not good for your retina. But if, for example, you're outside and I was at the park with my dog this morning and the sun's rising behind me, I don't need to be looking towards it. There's plenty of light right in front of me. So it's just being out in that light. So you may, if it's a really bright day like it is in Sydney today, you may still want to take your sunglasses for when it's coming into your eyes. Oh yes, Haley, integrated GP or doctor absolutely is a massive thing. Are there any other questions on sunlight? I'm going to check. There's no. There's a great quote. I can't remember right now, but I quoted it on my LinkedIn profile as well. Light is like a cup of coffee. So if you can get light in the morning, and then in the afternoon, you might get that sort of 3 p.m. slump. You go outside, you buy a coffee, you might have a brief walk going to get the coffee. Experiment occasionally with getting a decaf coffee or just not getting coffee at all, and you might realize that actually some of that bump that you're getting, that boost in energy, is from the walk and the sunlight, not necessarily from the coffee. And the benefit there is you're then not going to have caffeine sitting in the system later on when you try to go to sleep at night. So moving through, when we look at cortisol and your circadian rhythm, this is actually still very connected to sunlight. So I'm guessing some people have heard of cortisol. Do you want to jump off mute or put in the chat what you've heard of cortisol? And Belle and I agree, defects, actually not bad. It can be okay. So when I say cortisol, what do you think of? What are the words that come to mind that are related to cortisol? Stress, fight or flight. Yep, absolutely. So cortisol is, it is a stress hormone, and it has a whole lot of different impacts on the body. And these impacts are actually meant to be benefits. The challenge is that fight or flight is your nervous system perceiving a threat. And the really key thing there is perceiving. So if you think about our cavemen and women ancestors, when they're sitting around the fire and everyone's there and comfortable, there's a couple of people looking out, checking for any predators, they can be really comfortable and actually just very, very relaxed. And that's when their parasympathetic nervous system switches on. That means they can digest, they can relax, their breathing's going to slow down. When they see a tiger on the horizon or any kind of threat, and in the modern world, we can perceive even an email as a threat, or if someone comes to your desk and says, I need to have a chat now, that can be perceived as a threat. And you might notice your heart rate increase. You might start to sweat and your skin temperature might rise. You might actually find that your breathing is more shallow. That is your body perceiving some sort of threat, and your brain telling your pituitary axis, part of your brain, to release this hormone cortisol. And it's actually preparing you to fight or flight or to flee. So what it does is it suppresses the immune system, because in that moment you don't need it. It will stop you digesting anything that's in your stomach or gut at that point, because that again is not necessary when you want to fight or flee. It releases blood sugar because it thinks you're about to do something physical, because our systems have not evolved as quickly as our work has evolved. It's also going to give you heightened memory and attention and more focus. So it's really helping. It's actually trying to help you. What's that threat? I'm going to focus in on that. Also increasing your blood pressure. And this is why if you perceive a lot of things as threat over time and you're getting these cortisol spikes, these little spikes regularly over a long period of time, it can actually be quite unhealthy. It also decreases your sensitivity to pain, because you might be about to fight, and that could be useful. And it decreases serotonin, because you don't want to feel good if you're facing a threat. You want to be focused. You want to see what's going on. So cortisol is actually a good thing, particularly early in the morning. So you get this big spike. You can see on the right-hand side, huge spike in cortisol when you first wake up. When you get sunlight, you also get that little bit of a spike in cortisol. And it's a helpful thing. The thing is, if you are seeing threats everywhere and you're then getting these impacts, that's giving you little cortisol spikes. And if they're happening particularly later in the day for a long period, it can actually lead to illness. It can significantly impact your immune system over time. So it's not a bad thing, but it is a challenge if you don't have ways to regulate your response, which we will come to later in this session. Are there any questions on cortisol or your circadian rhythm? Okay, we'll keep going. For caffeine, this again is actually slightly linked. So you will get a slightly higher cortisol spike in the morning if you have caffeine as your first thing versus any food. And this can be a good thing if you don't suffer from anxiety or feel more anxious when you drink caffeine. So getting that nice big spike of cortisol early in the morning, that is great. That is actually what helps to get you out of bed. Cortisol and dopamine are basically the two things that get you up and going and get you motivated. So caffeine early in the morning is not necessarily a bad thing. There is one caveat, which is if you can potentially delay that first coffee about 90 minutes up to 120 minutes after you wake up, it's going to allow some catecholamines, some other chemicals that come through your body, to completely deplete out of your body before you start to drink caffeine. Basically, it just means that if you delay that first coffee about an hour and a half, you get less of a drop at 3 p.m. You can still have it first thing in the morning if you want to. It's just going to make it more likely that you're going to get that drop and potentially crave a coffee or sugar in sort of mid-afternoon period. And coffee is a good thing for most people if their dosage is right. So if you're having low to moderate dosages, so yeah, Kathleen, don't worry about your coffee. It's absolutely fine. So if you're having like 1, maybe 2 a day, and this really depends on the person, it's very personal, it's going to potentially, and in most cases, improve your alertness, actually help you to pay attention and to respond to things. In the high doses, and this is where you'll see things, a lot of people who go to the gym a lot, for example, will take things that have a lot of caffeine in them. You do want to be careful with the dosage, but when you're taking something that has more than 200 milligrams, and a coffee is usually about 80 to 100 milligrams, then actually it does give you increased muscular strength and endurance. It's worth noting if you drink caffeine after about midday, depending on when you go to bed, there's going to be some caffeine still in your body when you're trying to go to sleep. And you might feel like it doesn't affect you. This is also the same thing with alcohol, and you have a drink and you go to bed and you think you sleep fine. All of the studies show that you don't sleep as well as you think you do if you have caffeine remaining in your system or if you have alcohol in your system. So there's multiple studies that can point you into the direction if you want to go into the detail. But if you really want to get that incredible sleep, you want to try and make sure you don't have caffeine in your system, and you want to try and minimize any alcohol in your system as well. One thing I do find really interesting, caffeine, so it works partly by stopping the receptors that tell you you're tired. It also works by releasing dopamine, which is related to pleasure and reward and motivation. When you add caffeine to anything you eat, so like really random just things that you eat, it makes them much more addictive because that dopamine release is actually really, really pleasurable. So I just find that quite interesting, but it does have some neuroprotective effects. And, you know, my stepdad having Parkinson's, they actually recommend caffeine because Parkinson's is a challenge where you don't produce your own dopamine anymore. And this helps to activate those dopaminergic receptors. So yes, it's a good thing, but if it gives you anxiety or it gives you any sort of side effects, maybe it's not for you. If you've got questions, did we cover your question, Gunther? I think we did. I'm just going back. Oh, having coffee just before it. No, it's not bad. Just make sure you're giving yourself enough time to develop and digest the caffeine. So we're going to move a little bit into the mindset section where we talk about actually how you perceive things. And we'll spend about 10 to 12 minutes in this session. And then I've got a couple of emotional regulation things that you can potentially use. Please just keep the questions coming as you're going. Thanks for the comment, Norman. So some of you have seen this before, so please jump in with any questions that you potentially haven't asked before. So one of the things that's really blown my mind studying neuroscience is that you actually literally see what you look for. And you can likely relate to this, for example, when you go to buy a new car. And if you're looking to buy a red Tesla, all of a sudden, you see all these red Teslas everywhere. You think, what? How is that? Yeah, totally. I can see Paula nodding, Bella saying, yep. And there's a particular part of your brain, there's multiple things happening here, but there's one specific part, the reticular activating system, and that is very goal directed. So when you have a goal, it is going to be looking, it's going to be filtering and looking for that specific thing. So that's actually what's happening there. It's not just a coincidence. But the really crazy thing is that I used to think that you saw the world and you saw pretty much everything that was going on, and then you filtered down to what was relevant, and that was kind of the things that you noticed. But that's not actually what happens when you talk to neuroscientists or you read through any of the literature. Our brains are actually prediction machines because there's too much going on. So what happens is that your previous experience and your beliefs about the world, you take those and you make a prediction about what is about to happen, what's going to happen that day, and then you look for that. So you will completely ignore things that are right in front of you because they're not part of what you're looking for. And the best example of this is a 25-year-old study, relatively simple. And what they did is they had, I think it was 6 people in white t-shirts, 6 people in black t-shirts approximately. And they asked people to count the number of times that the people in white t-shirts threw a ball. And it was 14. Most people got that right. That wasn't the point. They then asked people, did you see the gorilla that walked through twice? No, nobody saw it because they were looking for the white ball. And this is a big person in a gorilla suit, but they didn't see it, and he walked through twice. So you really, and there's other examples as well, but you really actually don't see things that are right in front of you if they don't match up with what you're expecting to see. But it does get crazier because you also experience what you expect. And the studies here are pretty out of control. So there's quite a few. I'm just going to talk you through a couple. One of them was a study by a neuroscientist called Alia Crum, and she had 84 hotel cleaners. She split them into 2 groups. She told half of them all of the benefits of what they were doing, because it's actually a very physical job, you know, the stripping sheets and vacuuming, etc. They were meeting the US Surgeon General's recommendations for exercise. She tracked the group that knew all of the benefits of their job, and then the placebo group, who weren't told anything. After 1 month, even though they hadn't changed anything in the diet or their exercise outside of work, those who were told the benefits of their job had lost 1 kilo on average, and their blood pressure on average had gone from elevated to normal. So just the actual understanding of the benefits of their job meant that they were healthier. They weren't wearing any sort of tracking device though. So one of Alia Crum's colleagues, Octavia Zart, then looked at health surveys over 21 years with 60,000 people. And a fair chunk of these people were actually wearing accelerometers, which tracked their movement. They found that people's perceived fitness was a better predictor of their actual health, and that if they were pessimistic about their health, they were 71% more likely to die, even if they had like the same levels of activity as somebody else. So they may actually be healthy and active, but they perceived their fitness as worse, so they were more likely to die over that 21-year period. There was also a study done with students. A lot of studies are often done with students, but these students were asked to rate statements around stress. And they were basically statements that were talking about whether stress was debilitating or enhancing? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? They were then asked to do a presentation, and they tracked the cortisol and the physiological reactions, so things like skin temperature, sweating, heart rate, and blood pressure. The students that believed that stress was a bad thing had a more elevated response. They had elevated cortisol levels. They were sweating more, their blood pressure rose more, versus those who thought that stress was enhancing. So their body was responding to the expectations that they had. Before I move on to just how powerful the placebo effect is, I'm curious, does anyone have any comments or questions? Okay, I'll keep moving. So you've likely heard of the placebo effect and you think, oh yeah, like sugar pills, and it can be powerful, but it's actually this incredibly powerful thing that impacts 6 different systems in your body. And it can work in reverse, which we'll come to in a minute. But one of the studies they showed, they had some patients who were experiencing mild pain, not extreme pain, but they're in a hospital. They were hooked up to an IV drip. There was morphine in the IV drip, but the patients were told that it was saline. They didn't experience the same pain relief, even though they were actually given this incredibly powerful painkiller, because they believed it was saline. So the placebo effect is massively, massively powerful, and it's not just impacting the specific system that you think it is. The challenge as well is that there's this opposite thing called the nocebo effect. And we just talked about these people who thought that they were not particularly fit and healthy. And this self-fulfilling prophecy of disbelief can actually be quite damaging. And you do need to be careful around what you consume, because there's a decent chance that at the moment in particular, this is impacting you. So I would like you to guess. Some of you know the answer. So if you know the answer to this, obviously, please let the others have a guess. But I'm going to read this out, and I'd love you to drop any guesses into the chat. You can guess as many things as you like. So imagine that a new drug comes on the market. It's super addictive and everyone's hooked. Scientists investigate and soon conclude that the drug causes, I quote, a misperception of risk, so thinking everything's more risky than it is, anxiety, lower mood levels, learned helplessness, contempt and hostility towards others, and desensitization. What do you think this is? Ozempic. Hayley, it's not Ozempic. I love that response though. That's great. Any other guesses? Alcohol, feedback. It's not alcohol. There is some really interesting studies around alcohol. There is actually no safe or healthy level of alcohol. They've shown that pretty clearly now, but if you're going to have some, just limit it. It's not TV really. Capitalism, the news. Belen, yes, it is the news. Reading the news causes a misperception of risk. So you think the world is riskier than it is. Anxiety, lower, it causes all of those things, because the news typically is all the bad news. Particularly at the moment, it's people behaving badly, breaking the law, somebody's died, there's been a car accident, whatever it is. It's really the good news. You don't see headlines about, poverty has been reduced, smallpox has been eradicated. They're like tiny little things, and they don't last. Whereas when something negative is happening, that's taken over a long period of time, there's lots of little updates. So it does actually have an impact on your mood and your perception of the world around you. If you think about actually just the community of people around you, it's highly unlikely that the people you interact with day to day are engaged in fraud, crime, or dealing with a natural disaster in that moment. Yes, that Lee Sales book, I can't remember what it's called, but yeah. So it doesn't mean don't listen or watch the news. But what it does mean is to be really careful with what you're consuming into your brain, because that, welcome, Laura, great to see you. That does mean that is going to impact your mindset and your perception of the world, particularly any ordinary day. Yes, particularly at the moment, because we get news from all over the world. So there are millions of negative things happening all over the world that feed into that news cycle. And then the news outlets are going to present you with the negative things and all the things you click on, which is usually the most extreme. So it's just giving you this unbalanced view of the world and of people at large. Now, what do you think? Is stress good or bad for us? So Ali Akram is this, and I will send the link to the video. You can watch it if you like. She's talking about a study that she did with a group of workers where they'd been told that some of the team needed to be made redundant. And they do, they split them. So they actually track the two different groups. And the only difference between these two different groups, both know that their business is going to become smaller and some of them are at risk of losing their jobs. Some of them are shown a video with examples of stress being debilitating. And it talks about all of the impacts, and it shows examples in sports and media and politics and all of those sorts of different things. And it's all true, you know, like there are really, really challenging things about stress and what it can do. The other group is shown a video that stress is enhancing and that it actually helps you to focus. It gives you a better attention. You know, it gives you improved cognition in certain ways. And again, they're all true. It's just filtering it in a different way. The thing that blows my mind is that when they then actually track these people over time, they see less sick leave in the group that watched the video that said that stress is enhancing. So there are multiple impacts, but the main thing being that your physical response is actually better if you believe that stress is good for you. Now, obviously, there are levels of stress that may not be good for you, and over a long period of time, it's not necessarily true. But if you can go into something with the mindset that this is an opportunity, that I can learn from this, that I can ask for help, then it is actually going to change your physiological response. And it's also going to change the way that you perceive what's in front of you. Because remember, your brain is a prediction machine. So it is going to predict and look for evidence that stress is bad for you if you think it's bad. And it's going to look for evidence that stress is good for you if you think it's good. So for example, you will be more likely potentially to ask for help if you think that stress is good for you, which is then going to potentially actually increase your social connections. One of the quickest ways, this is quite interesting, but in psychology, one of the quickest ways to build trust with someone is actually to ask them for help, not to help them, because you're showing a level of vulnerability by asking for help. So I will share the link to Alia's video if you would like to watch it in full. But I also want to share with you one study that is about rats, often about rats, when it's in neuroscience. And what they find is that when you can choose to do something, when you can actively choose to do something, even if you don't really want to do it, and work is often full of, you know, those admin or chores or things that are a bit uncomfortable, when you can transform a chore into a meaningful choice, it has a really significant difference. And what they did is they put rats into two running wheels. One rat got to run whenever it wanted to. The other rat could only run when the first rat was running. They were connected. This actually had impacts to the cortisol. So the second rat that had no choice had much higher levels of cortisol. Its blood pressure was all over the place. Its heart rate was all over the place. And it didn't get the beneficial theta brain waves that the first rat got. So when you actively choose, when you actively choose to do something, it really makes a difference. Thank you for sharing, Laura, who said, I find it really helpful to change my thinking from I have to do X to I get to do X. Some people talk about pressure being a privilege. I think you need to be careful that you don't put too much pressure on yourself. But having the opportunity to do something challenging or uncomfortable is going to help you grow. Kathleen, that is the whole theory behind the barefoot investor making finance fun-ish. Yes, absolutely. Is this resonating with anybody else? I see a couple of nods. Beautiful. So I'm going to quickly move into emotional regulation and a couple of things here, and then we're going to wrap up. We had this down to finish at 12:50. I am available until 1 p.m. if you have questions beyond that. So emotional regulation, I believe it's actually a key, almost the core skill to having a happy, productive, satisfying life, because it gives you choice. If you can't regulate your emotion, then you are just reacting and you are not really making active choices. So I like people to think about, are emotions your superpower? Are they a helpful signal that tells you that something's important or something's not quite right? Or are they a kryptonite and they mean that you just explode or you don't say something when you really should do? And one of the ways that you can make it your superpower is to have lots of ways to be able to change your emotional state. And it's important to note that your emotions actually only last 90 seconds. So in your brain, it's just maximum 90 seconds when you have that emotion. If it's lasting longer than that, that's because you're holding on to it. You're attaching meaning to it, maybe from the past, or you're not letting yourself to actually just feel it and let it go. There's a saying that emotions are like tunnels. You have to move through them to get to the light at the end. So when you try not to feel an emotion, maybe you try not to feel guilt, you layer that with shame, you actually make it last longer, you get stuck in it. So there's a whole list on this screen of different ways that you can change your emotional state, but I'd actually invite you to think about it in 3 different groups. And I started using this with a couple of different clients. So one of those is, what can you do in the moment? If something is upsetting you or something is giving you a really strong emotional response, could be positive or negative, what are some of the things that you can do? And on the unhealthy side, these might be things like yelling or just conceding and people pleasing to avoid an argument. Eating your feelings is a really common response. This is something I have definitely done in the past. But alternatives to that would actually be having a breathing practice. Maybe you've got some favorite music that you can work with. It might be touch. So actually touching yourself, there are lots of different things that I can share information about, or asking someone for a hug, taking a break. In the middle section, you've got things that give you a better ability to tap into what's happening. And this is your habits and routines. So it might be daily or weekly. And this might be things like, hanging out for wine o'clock. And I used to love this. And potentially, maybe that single glass of wine, that's okay. But if it becomes a regular habit and it's impacting you in other ways, particularly anything that's excessive, so, excessive exercise is really not good for you, for example, then that is actually something where you want to look at, well, what are some other options here? So getting good sleep, getting your sunlight, having some sort of movement and exercise scattered in your day, trying not to just have like a chunk at one time and then you sit for the rest of the day. Social connection is massive. Getting time in nature is actually incredibly healthy for you in many ways. And something that a lot of people are not comfortable with is actually celebrating progress and just celebrating achievements whenever you can. It has a really significant impact to your mental well-being. The third section, this is like the foundation. This is what's impacting your mindset and how you're developing your emotional intelligence skills. And there's some really, really great tools out there. And this is something that I focus on a lot with my clients, is around building your emotional intelligence, understanding what you're feeling, being able to specifically label it, understanding what you want to feel in the future, how do you want to move towards that, and having tools like reframing. So I'll give you one simple example. My favorite word is yet. I'm not great at such and such yet. That, when you actually do that regularly, will change your perception of yourself and of what you're doing. On the unhealthy side, this is where you might get stuck in those loops, rumination, you get stuck into something. That's particularly a challenge if you're isolated, or black and white thinking everyone's all good or all bad, when the reality is it's likely in the middle. So would anyone like to join me for a brief box breathing exercise? I know some of you have done this before, but this is one really simple way to reset and just give yourself a moment. It can be 90 seconds. It can be 3 or 4 minutes. Beautiful, Haley. Thank you. Body balance and massage. Yes. Music. Yes, Norman. I love that too. I've got some tracks that I really, really love. So you may like to close your eyes for the box breathing, and we're only going to do this for about 90 seconds. It's very brief. I'd encourage you to ensure that you're sitting in a comfortable way. Your shoulders are relaxed. They're pulled back a little bit, still in a comfortable way. And you're just sitting nice and straight. Your head and your neck are really nicely, comfortably balanced on your body. You can stand up if you want to. And we're going to breathe in for 4, 3, 2, 1. Then hold for 4, 3, 2, 1. You breathe out for 4, 3, 2, 1. And hold for 4, 3, 2, 1. Breathe in for 4, 3, 2, 1. And hold for 4, 3, 2, 1. And you keep tracing the box in your mind. Breathing in for 4, holding for 4, and breathing out for 4. And whenever you're ready, take a really big, deep breath. And then a nice, long exhale. If you do have your eyes closed, you might like to very slowly open them. And if you can, just keep that slightly slower, really relaxed breathing as you open your eyes and come back into the call. And when you're ready, I would love to hear how you found that. That was very brief. This is the kind of thing, if you can do it for 2 or 3 minutes, you're actually moving your nervous system from that fight or flight state, if you were potentially in that state, into the rest and digest state. It's helping you throughout your whole body to calm down. I'm loving the heart. Thank you. Haley said, thank you. Norman said, deeply relaxing. Narisha said, relaxed. I would really encourage you to think about something like this, whatever works for you, regularly. Find a time in the day. You may have heard of habit stacking, where when you do something that you do every day, like brushing your teeth, when you want to create a new habit, attach your new habit to the existing thing that you already do. We're coming almost to the end. I'm going to do a quick recap. So we had a chat about your circadian rhythm and your body clock. It impacts your whole body. Feel free also to come off video if you would like to for the last couple of minutes. We also talked about natural light. Your eyes, remember, they are actually directly in your brain, like it is directly connected. So really, I would encourage you, if you only do one thing from this, make sure you get that early morning sunlight for at least 15 minutes each day. And if you can, go out a little bit during the day and later in the afternoon. That actually helps to manage your serotonin and your cortisol levels, and you will sleep better. Your mindset creates your experience, and you will literally see what you look for, and you will experience what you expect. We also had a brief chat about emotions. If you can get familiar with them, and we didn't talk about emotional labeling, but some of the Westpac team who've been through this before understand this. If you can label them more specifically, then it actually helps to manage them. They're really just signals. They're trying to tell you something. And then look at potentially expanding your emotional regulation skills. What could you bring in? If you're always depending on your breath, maybe you can bring in some movement. Or if music is your favorite thing, what about posture? Or is there something you want to develop in that emotional intelligence space? So if you want to work more with me, there are plenty of options. You can book an intro call on my website, or you can just message me on LinkedIn. I love talking about all these things, so you're also welcome just to book an intro call and have a bit of a chat. I also work with organizations, and I have a small group program coming up in January.